How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Welcome back to my conversation with Robert Cujo Teschner, combat veteran, founder and CEO of VMAX Group, and author of the book Debrief to Win. Last time, in explaining how he translates what's being done by high-performance military teams into the business space, Cujo told us that, a team is a team is a team, no matter the environment. Today, we dive back into that idea, and we're going to go deeper into the debrief process that Cujo standardized during his time in the U.S. Air Force.
High performance team world, we're trying to get to a better tomorrow. So if we didn't hit the mark today, I own this, and I own that I owe it to the team to figure out how we're going to do so the next time. Mm-hmm. And so the ownership means taking action to do better.
So let's go back to then the broader question. That's what we mean by accountability. I really like that. That provides more clarity for me. And so how do we create a culture? This is Culture Architects. How do we create a culture where that is embedded in the way we look at things?
Good. And I will tell you, one of the book studies that I have done is on a book called Culture by Design.
I've heard of that somewhere.
And it's funny to be talking to you on your podcast about this, but truly, I really appreciated the work that you did, which is to say, if I were to summarize it in my words, having a bunch of core values written up on the wall is meaningless. Whether or not we live them is the part that matters to us. We've got to find a way to do so. For us, at VMAX Group, we're trying to get everybody to learn to manifest vulnerability as a component to being able to take ownership of. So you'd be able to say, listen, this is my mistake. I turns out in my analysis, screwed this thing up, which is going to, now that we've identified this, help me to make sure that we address this thing. And the next time we're not going to have that same outcome. So vulnerability is a piece of this, as are other behaviors, to include self-awareness as a component of emotional intelligence, and humility as a function of, hey, I can't let pride get in the way of my willingness to learn, and others. And so for us, it's about living in a way that postures us to be able to be a learning organization. And that means, as a consequence of accountability, formalizing a process to give feedback on how it is that we're behaving. It's one thing to say, this is a really important fundamental for me. It's another thing to give somebody feedback on whether or not they're actually evidencing that fundamental and how they're doing. So we have a mechanism for doing all of this. It's called a debrief. That's where we're going to practice this version of accountability, which means taking ownership of why things went the way that they did, so that we can have a better outcome tomorrow. And how we go about that really matters.
Yeah. And, as I hear that, what I'm thinking, what's going through my mind is, many times, again, when we're facilitating with a leadership group and they're talking about the things that are important, they'll want people to take ownership for things or to speak up, or I'll hear people talk about share bad news early and all those kinds of things. And what I'm always reminding them is, you have to create an environment where it's safe to do that. So if we don't have an environment where it's safe to do that, because the last time somebody brought up something, they got their head chewed off, or they got shamed, or whatever, any number of other things that happen, I'm not going to speak up. You got to be kidding me. It's not a safe place to do that. So I think in our world, there are a number of fundamentals that contribute to creating a safe place. One of our most common ones, it's in virtually all of our clients, including my own company, we call it practice blameless problem solving. So if problem solving, and for us, I always say there's three elements to blameless problem solving. First is, what happened? Let's just fix the darn thing. I don't really care whose fault it was. Just fix the darn thing. Second thing is sort of your version of debrief. Well, what happened there? How do I learn from that? And the third part, which would really relate to your version of accountability, is, how do we take what we just learned and incorporate some process improvement so that the new improved process reduces the chance of making that same mistake again? What doesn't matter is pointing fingers and blaming each other. If you have a blame-filled environment, it's going to be pretty hard to create a culture of accountability in the way that you're describing it. If I've got a learning environment, the blameless environment is a learning environment, well then, okay, it's perfectly okay to me to say, hey, time out. I screwed up here. Let's see what we learn here. Or I want your feedback because I need to get better. And if you've got an environment that doesn't encourage that, it's going to be pretty hard to do the things you're describing.
Absolutely. And I look back on my time on active duty, and there's a lot of things about how we did the things that we did that I didn't understand or even think about while I was doing it. Like it just happened, it just happened. Part of the reason for writing the book, Debrief to Win, was to try to reverse engineer why things happen the way that they did so that I could understand what to teach. And what we're really getting at is something that I never confronted when I was in uniform, only learned about years later, and it's called psychological safety. And this is the environment that you're talking about. It describes this blameless problem-solving environment that we have in a fighter squadron and don't know. And having and Dr. Timothy Clark and Amy Edmondson is all over the place when it comes to psychological safety. And many of the people that are familiar with you are very familiar with her. But I think Dr. Clark's work is also brilliant because it gives us a roadmap into creating psychological safety. He defines this environment, this blameless problem-solving environment, as an environment of rewarded vulnerability.
Interesting phrase.
And I think it's a great phrase to describe what we're getting at. Like it takes vulnerability to get to ownership. I mean, it's easy to own a win. We're talking about things not going so well. How do we get to that point? It's one thing to say, I demand that you be vulnerable. It's another thing for when David Friedman manifests vulnerability, says, look, we didn't hit the mark on this thing and it's my fault. Here's what I did that cost us, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Having a mechanism to reward that appropriately is important. In a fighter squadron, that's responded to just with words. Usually, all right, brother, that makes perfect sense. Really appreciate you bringing this up. And when somebody that you trust, somebody that you respect, somebody that you have admiration for because they've got demonstrated confidence says, hey, listen, appreciate you being vulnerable right now. That's enough to say, okay, I can be vulnerable here again in the future. I'm not being punished for doing so. And when I see that person also manifest vulnerability, then it makes it that much easier. And that's a necessary precondition to learning.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was so imperative in the previous life, which is just as imperative in this one, is we had to, on the front lines of our nation's defense, learn our way through disruption. Because we're going against an opponent who's trying to bring their best every time. And they're trying to learn from us what it is that we're doing. And arguably, if we do the same thing every time that we go out there, then we're setting ourselves up to fail. So we have to be really a place that generates innovation constantly. And we've always got to be learning. What business doesn't need to be an incubator, as Dr. Clark says, of innovation, doesn't need to be learning constantly to deal with a shifting marketplace, different customer demands, new features, technologies that are coming out. I mean, the world is learning so quickly right now. There's so much coming at us right now. Why wouldn't we want to be in a constant learning posture? It's one thing to say that, though. It's another thing to live it.
Yeah.
And that's why the work that you're doing is so important. You're intentional about helping people to be able to live what it takes to innovate and thrive.
So when you're working with a company and you're introducing the stuff that you do, and I imagine, and you and I've talked about this before, that to some extent, your story gets in the way. Because people just love, oh boy, he was a combat veteran. This is the coolest thing. He flew fighter jets. And so sometimes that can probably distract them from the meat of the real value of what you're trying to share with them. It's not the cool stories. It's the real learning. I'm curious, you go into a company and you're trying to help teach them how to debrief to win. What are the biggest obstacles?
I will tell you, like the general concept and understanding of creating this learning environment, relatively immediate, makes sense. It's just logical. So, so the understanding, why wouldn't you do that, right? Biggest obstacle is time, or at least perceived obstacle. Biggest self-limiting belief is there's no time for us as busy business people to learn our way, especially on the heels of a success. So if we won, we're not going to take the time typically to dig into why we won. We're just going to assume that it was because of us, because of the good work we did. That's what the CEO is paying people to do, is to go out there and win. And so when they do, no pause, no reflection, just on to the next thing. And it's justified, even by very well-intentioned senior leaders, as, look, there's no time to do this reflection thing. That is the number one obstacle.
Interesting. And what's fascinating about that, I mean, it's just in my own personal life, I am very reflective by nature, so I can't even help it. But I think about, I've often heard so many people talk, and you've heard them all the time, but talking about the importance of learning from your failures. And I've always said, I've learned way more from my successes. I've been fortunate enough to have a heck of a lot more successes than I have failures. But I'm always thinking about, I do a good talk, like you and I do so much speaking, and something worked really well. And I'm always thinking, that was fascinating. That was so cool the way they responded to that. I wonder what that was and why that happened and what can I learn from that? How can I do more of that? I learn way more from the things that go well than the things that don't. I'm always thinking about that. And so it's interesting that you talk about how most people move on from success. Great. Next, let's go. Keep moving. I would also imagine, I mean, I'm often, when people ask me about what's the biggest factor, a question I get frequently, and I suspect you get this too, is someone will ask me, okay, with all the companies you work with, what makes some of them do this better and some of them not do it as well? And I always say that, to me, it comes down to the leader. That one, I always say that the single most important ingredient in the success of any culture initiative is what I call CEO sponsorship. It starts at the top. But secondly, that better leaders implement everything they do better. It doesn't matter whether they're doing debrief to win or they're doing fundamentals or they're doing lean process improvement. They just do everything better because they seem to know how to inspire their people to want to go somewhere. Does that match your experience?
100%. And if you think about it, that's just the human lived experience, but maybe even best illustrated in the world of sports.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at, take college football, for example. I mean, there's any number of college football teams. They're all doing the same thing. In the summertime, they're all practicing. They've recruited to get these people to come to practice. Then they got these practices. They got all these different coaches that are out there. They're doing the same kinds of drills. They're doing the same kinds of things. They're doing the same stuff that the kids have been doing since they were in high school. And yet when they get out there and they compete, some teams consistently win. I mean, through the decades, even some teams consistently win, and other teams, And you can look at it and say, well, I mean, no matter what we do around here, it's a lost cause because we only can ever get to. But there's some leaders who are also tied to the teams that consistently win. And there's something about how they inspire their teammates that's different and better.
Yep. Yeah. And no matter what they're doing, they seem to be able to do that better.
That's right.
I think when I think about that, again, being reflective, I'm always thinking about leadership. And my observation is, this doesn't answer the question, but my observation is that there's a big difference between being what I call a good business person and being a good leader of human beings. And sometimes they exist in the same person and sometimes they don't. And I would describe a good business person in the way that I'm using that language as somebody they may have good skills around strategic planning, or they may have a good sense of what the product market fit is for whatever they're producing, or where they should make investment decisions, et cetera. And you could be brilliant about those things. That's not the same as being a leader of human beings. And sometimes some of the CEOs I've worked with and you've worked with are really good at both of those. And some are good at one, and they're not that good at leading human beings. And if they're not that good at leading human beings, there's a limit to how far they'll go, because ultimately it comes down to, as you said at the very outset, your ability to inspire the people that are on your team to want to bring their best every day.
That's exactly right. And throwing money at the problem is not going to solve anything. Oftentimes another challenge that is articulated is, it's hard to get the right kind of people because Folks are just out there to make a buck, and nobody's really.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, one of the features of our military is, and my suspicion is, your brother didn't get paid a whole heck of a lot when he graduated from West Point to go
Yeah.
forth potentially to give his all for our country. There was something else that was inspiring him. And one of the things that we do a pretty good job of, I think, in our military is creating leaders that can inspire a disparate group
Yes.
of people who aren't getting paid a lot to want to go forth and do really amazing things in harm's way.
Yeah.
And there's something about that inspirational quality of leadership that, that matters a lot in a
Yeah.
disruptive world. And I think another self-limiting belief is, well, I guess you're just born with that. And if you're not born with that, you're never going to get there. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched different leaders with different styles inspire, like
Mm-hmm.
folks that were really outgoing and could give a wonderful, off the top of their brain, 17-hour talk that you wanted to just listen to for all 17 hours, and others who were quiet and more reserved and still had the capacity to inspire people to want to
Definitely.
follow. And they built on whatever their natural inclinations were and did it. I think the common denominator between the leaders that inspired well that I grew up with in the military was they wanted to connect, and they wanted to get the best out of the teams, and they wanted to build teams that won. And I've noticed that sometimes, especially in the entrepreneurial world, you have maybe we'll call it like the begrudging or default leader. Like, I had the idea, brought it to market,
Mm-hmm.
market liked it. It went from party 1 to a party of 10, 15. We're 100 now, got different locations. It's a different dynamic. I don't like that piece of this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I prefer just working on the technical aspects of it. And yeah, that's not going to probably lend itself towards, let me go out there and try to build the bonds that we need to in order to get to where performance will take us. So you have to kind of want to learn that and then dedicate yourself to doing so en
And
route
so,
to
and
achieving
so
what it
when you
takes.
see leaders who, I mean, that what you just described, I certainly see plenty among the kinds of companies that you and I work with, small to middle-sized entrepreneurial companies. Founder built some technology, some product, some service, and now it's gotten big, and and the leading of people isn't necessarily what they really want. So in your experience in those situations, I mean, what I see is either they hire somebody to do that role, or they sell their business, or they struggle with that. And very few of them, in my experience, it's not impossible, but very few of them make the transition from being, I'll call it, subject matter expert to leader.
Mm-hmm.
And probably I'm thinking out loud as we speak, probably because they have to want to.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to want to be that leader to say, I'm going to take on learning how to do that. If that's not really what you want to do, it doesn't usually ever happen. They never make that transition. So that they either struggle or they hire somebody else. Is that your observation as well?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. And so then we realize when it comes to performance, it's going to be capped at some level.
Yeah.
That may be good enough. And one of the challenges that I also find interesting and very rewarding to take on is trying to push somebody past this is good enough
Mm.
into wanting to achieve a higher level of performance. And I mean, there's a level of happiness that we can achieve if this level of performance at my current level of leadership is enough to pay the bills,
Mm-hmm.
vacations, got a second home and the whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
and we're satisfied with that. But the sad part there is that probably the people who suffer are the teammates who wish that they could
Yes.
push towards a higher degree of achievement.
Yeah.
And so then those are the ones that are out there searching for a team that's playing for more than average,
Yeah.
and so in kind of my ideal vision of what it is that we'd create a leader who says, all right, we're already awesome. This is great. There's a certain degree of goodness here. We think, based upon the people that we're privileged to lead, that we could get to an even higher degree of performance. We think that we would actually serve our teammates by working together to achieve it. And that's a good thing to strive for.
Yeah. It's fun to win. It's much more fun to be. It's much more fun to be on a championship team than one that's just barely getting by. Everybody's better off with that.
One would think so. I firmly believe so. I think there's a lot of other people that share our opinion about this and just want to be shown the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting when you talk about the self-limiting beliefs. I'm thinking of a person in particular who I play golf with on occasion, a club that I belong to. And he's a business owner. It's a construction kind of company. He's got 20 employees or so. And he is always complaining about, you just can't find good people these days. The guys just don't want to work. They don't want to show up and put the extra effort in. And like you, I just want to say to him, well, where's their inspiration? Who's leading this team? But in his view, it's the marketplace. It's not him. It's just how people are these days. You know how these young people are. They don't want to work. Not my experience.
Not at all.
It's fascinating to see.
And if I may, you reminded me of a story, experience that I had. It was a number of years ago, talking with a business leader concerned about the future of the company. Actually, there was an active effort to shut the company down, and we were trying to sort of walk our way through. Is there a way to a better future? And one of the questions I asked him was, of your employees right now, if you could swap them out one for one, how many would you keep? And he basically came back with 20%. I keep 20% of the current workforce. Another question I asked him was, if I were to start working for you on Monday, what would my first day on the job look like, and what would my onboarding be? And the answer was, oh, that's easy. You're from day one, you're gonna work with your pod of people. Like, we're gonna put you down on the floor. You're gonna be there with the people that you're gonna be with for the rest of your time in this company. I said, okay, that's good to know. Then I went back to the first question. I said, of those 80% that you would have wanted to get rid of, who's responsible for inculcating me with your culture here, and who's making sure that I'm learning the right way to create this, successful organization? And his response was, oh, son of a gun. It was more forceful in the way that he described it. I'm like, okay, so you can give in and say that there's no hope, or you could realize that it takes leadership to build a team. The people that we have with us matter in that equation. And if we've poisoned the well and we've got a bunch of people that are demoralized already, we have to think through how do we reverse this thing, which takes an even greater inject of leadership. And then another piece of this is, how do we, when we add to the team, get somebody on board with living our values, which includes trying to get to performance. And that has to be intentional. It's not just going to happen by happenstance.
Yeah. We call that integration, how you integrate people. I say to people all the time, the first several days in a company are just about the most important days of the whole career. They're picking up all the messages. And exactly to your point, if we're not doing that intentionally, if we're not planning every aspect of that experience, who knows who's influencing those people? It might be a cynical jerk with a lousy attitude. And then they've been poisoned.
100%. And it's rooted deep in there too. I mean, that's going to weigh heavily on the person's consciousness. They're going to be thinking about that poison from the moment that it was planted until the day that they exit.
Yep. Yeah. When I think about, this issue of you can't find good people these days and that kind of mentality, self-limiting belief, one of the examples I often like to use with people is I look at Chick-fil-A. And you think, they're so good, and everybody has the experience of how their people treat people differently, and they seem happier, and they give better service, and they say my pleasure, and everywhere you go from a performance standpoint, there's a line wrapping around the building 3 times, and next across the street is the McDonald's that's empty. And you see this, and I like them as an example because they're drawing from the same population that McDonald's and Hardee's and Wendy's is as well. It's not like they get the pick of the litter. They got the same part-time workers, high school kids, retirees who, those people don't really care. They don't really want to work, except they do at Chick-fil-A. So something's happening there, and it's not by accident. And it's just a good proof that it can be done.
100%. In fact, I use the exact same illustration in my work. And part of it was driven by the fact that of the 2 things that influenced me the most growing up, one being the United States Air Force, for sure, influenced me the most. It taught me how to lead, taught me how to build teams that win, taught me how to survive disruption, taught me how to build a capacity for resilience and so much other goodness. The other organization was Chick-fil-A, which was the first place I ever worked. And one of the things about my experience as a 14-year-old working at the Chick-fil-A at the Chesterfield Mall in just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, was when I worked there, my parents and everybody that was close to me was worried because I'd had the ambition of being a fighter pilot since I was 4 years old.
Wow.
I mean, you talk about deeply rooted. I knew I knew that I was going to be a fighter pilot since I was a little kid, and I never wavered from that until I got to Chick-fil-A. And there's something special about working there. And we were in a mall. So
fighter pilot chicken sandwiches. I don't know.
But here's the thing about it. You looked across the way, all these people coming through day after day after day. Orange Julius, totally empty. Burger King, totally empty. We always had foot traffic. People gravitated to us. They paid us extra to go deliver to Sears and J.C. Penney's. And there was there was this team environment that I experienced as a kid working behind the desk at the Chick-fil-A that I looked forward to. I was more alive on the days that I got to come to work than on the days when I wasn't able to.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
At a fast food joint.
At a fast food joint that was selling chicken.
Yep. And it's such great evidence of everything that we're talking about. Well, this is fascinating. So tell me briefly a little bit about VMAX Group. And so for our audience, what exactly do you do at VMAX Group? If people are interested in learning more, where would they learn more from?
Good. Well, thank you for that, David. We teach leadership, and we teach leaders how to build teams that win. Company of ex-fighter pilots, everybody lived what we teach. So we have the benefit of decades of background, of understanding through implementation, and find joy in helping people to learn how to lead better in any domain, not just in business. Principles we teach are universally applicable. Build a stronger family team is really important to us. Build a stronger spiritual team. Wherever it is that you team, this is where we're focused on teaching how to team better. So our programs are expansive. We've got all kinds of things we could talk about, but it just comes down to learning how to lead and build teams that win. That's our only focus in life.
Nice. And where would people find out more about VMAX Group?
VMAXGroupLLC.com. VMAXGroup LLC.com. Our website takes you to other websites. It's got everything on it. It's a one-stop shop.
Super. Well, and for our audience's sake, you should also know, if you want to learn more about Cujo, of course, you can go to VMAX Group. But also, Cujo will be a featured speaker at our annual CultureWise Summit coming up in early November in Philadelphia. And so if you want to get to meet Cujo in person, the legend, please come to the summit. You can, if you go to CultureWise.com, you can see more information about the summit there, but Cujo will be one of our featured speakers there. So Cujo, really appreciate you being with us today. Fascinating conversation and a real value that you've provided to the business community and to our audience. So thank you so much for joining me.
David, thank you for your friendship. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. I'm a firm believer in your approach, and I want you to keep on winning.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode of Culture Architects with my fellow culture architect, Robert Cujo Teschner, combat veteran, author, and founder and CEO of VMAX Group. Folks, if you've been enjoying our show, make sure you subscribe, and that way you'll get automatic updates about my newest episodes and my latest guests. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love it if you left us a review, and that way more culture fans like you can discover the show. And if you'd like to learn more about how to build a high-performing culture in your organization, check us out at CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.